Welcome to Marvel Champions Podcast, a podcast about Marvel Champions, the card game. I am your host, Scott, and with me, as always, my co-host, Ryan.
Hey, Scott, are you ready to talk about some of these new villains from Next Evolution?
Some new villains. It's always the fun part of a box. More villains than heroes.
Yes. I mean, the whole point of the game is not only choosing your hero, but taking out the villain. So it's nice to see villains and how different they can be.
Yeah, and the boxes are nice because they introduce 5 new scenarios, typically. And then you can kind of run through the rest of the wave, and you're kind of returning back to them. So villains are very front-loaded in all the waves, it feels like.
Yeah. And this, the villains we're going to talk about is a first for Marvel Champions in their uniqueness of you're using the same villains for both scenarios.
Yes. Technically, we do have another one. What other villain do you see multiple times? 2 separate scenarios.
I mean, you have Green Goblin that has 2 scenarios.
That's true. I was thinking
but
somebody
it is.
else.
Oh, shoot. Okay, hold on. I can figure this out. It's not Mojo stuff. It's not in that box.
All right, well, collect your thoughts.
Okay, collecting.
That was my hint.
Oh, no, but it's still a different villain card.
It is. And all those are different villain cards, but they're technically both the collector.
Yes. But these, on the other hand, are the exact same villain cards for both scenarios.
That is correct.
Which, I've talked about this, that it'd be fun that if there was somehow they were able to make updated scenarios or new scenarios for older villains, kind of like a Rhino. His first one is what is it called? Not Break and Taken. That's his, or is that what it's called?
No, that's a side scheme that
That's
comes
a
out
side
when we get to
scheme.
stage 2.
Yeah, whatever it is, but like there's a part 2 to that one.
Okay.
They can just bring out more scenario cards, but use the same villain.
I think it's called the Break-In.
Yeah,
maybe.
I don't think they will, but this is
No.
kind of like an example of that, where they have one
What
scenario and they just make another scenario, but use the same ones.
Yeah, because technically the villain cards are not part of the scenario cards.
Correct.
Like the scenario is more like Siege.
Correct.
You
Yep.
use the Marauders cards with that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's talk about it. You just said it. Morlock Siege.
Morlock Siege. Let's start with the main schemes. We'll save the villains for a few minutes.
Yes.
I like how thematic. And this is, a spoiler. So if you haven't played Next Evolution, you plan to be surprised. This is your spoiler warning to stop, go play, and then come back and finish listening. But their first main scheme is Knock Knock. And
who's there?
Was it Interrupting Cow?
What?
Ooh, yeah. So the Marauders are jokesters, and they like to tell knock knock jokes.
That must be one of the 7, right?
Right. Yeah, the clown. So this one, it can't. If it reaches its threshold, you advance it.
Correct.
And there is a win condition that if you do have 3 villains under it, you can win the game. Or under routed. But it would be fairly difficult. I would not say it's impossible. There's people that do crazy things.
Wouldn't you have to defeat each villain each turn?
you would have 2 turns to defeat all 3 villains. Because the thing with this, it has a forced response. It's after you resolve the first step of the villain phase, you add 1 knock counter. And then it says if there's 3 knock counters, you advance it to stage 2A. So end of round 1, you'll start the villain phase, 1 will go on.
Yeah, so you'll have 3 turns, right?
No. 1, 2.
Yeah, you have your first turn,
3 turns,
add a counter, second turn.
The beginning of the third villain phase, sorry. Yeah.
Yes. So you have 3 turns to take out 3 villains.
Which would be difficult.
Yeah, it would be.
And each of those villains activate. 2 of those villains activate an additional time when the new villain comes out.
Yeah. I also like Knock Knock. I like the progression of it. It's a side scheme that is going to force your hand eventually. You get to choose how it does it, whether you defeat the villain somehow before that, or it pops, or the counters hit. Either way, it's going to flip if you're not killing the 3 villains.
Yeah. And it kind of changes the game a little bit. That's the big key factor of when the Morlock allies come out. That's the whole thing with this one, is you're protecting those Morlock allies. So it kind of changes the way the game plays after those first couple rounds, which is really, I like the design in that. You kind of start playing one way, and then the game changes on you.
Yeah, it's an accelerating vehicle. It's starting off in first gear. Not much is going on. You're trying to get set up. But as soon as it shifts into high gear, it goes to the 2A, and things are just rolling at that point.
And I feel like the whole scenario is like that, because every time you defeat a villain, it goes under the routed card, and the game gets slightly harder. Like the counter cards can be slightly harder and things like that. I do like that. I do like, since we're talking about routed villains under routed, there's 4 side schemes. They all have an icon on it, but they all gain kind of additional threat based off of how many villains you have on routed, so they get harder the deeper you are in the game, which I liked.
Yeah, a lot of the encounter deck scales to the routed card, which is nice.
Playing the game, I felt like we did pretty well with the first villain. Usually you'd stall a little bit on the second villain, and then by that time you were about at the third villain, you're pretty much firing on all cylinders. And usually that third villain pretty quick to die.
Yeah. It's speaking of villains, there's 7 of them that you can choose. You only play 3 of them, but there's 7 options, so there's a lot of variety in this scenario, which is really nice.
Yeah, it makes it where you can replay it and it not be the same game. You kind of get a new combination every time.
And they're all fairly standard, I guess. Most of them have pretty simple stats, like a 1-1 or a 1-2. I think, and this is standard. Most of them are. I think the strongest one is. Let's take a round here. A 2-0 or 1-1.
Yeah,
that's it. So they're not impacting you a lot with the stats, but they each have a choice you have to make. Either do something or their attack becomes stronger.
And everybody pretty much gets that +2 attack as their second option, except for 2 of them. And those were the 2 that I felt like played the most unique. Like, they weren't as easy to make the decision.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess for one of them, his first option is just awful.
And that's, I'm assuming you mean Grey Crow, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
His first option is discard the highest cost card you control, and that would be devastating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty nasty. And then you have his other option, which is Grey Crow gets plus X attack for that attack, where X is the printed cost of the highest cost card. So if you got, say, like the mansion out, that's a 4 cost. That's gonna hurt.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to discard that, so then he's gonna be punching you in the face for 5 in standard or 6 in his expert mode.
The other one that was played a little more unique was Harpoon.
Oh, our best and favorite villain, Harpoon.
Harpoon, good old Harpoon. Just going from his day job as a fisherman to,
taking
trying
to
take out X-Force with his harpoon gun.
Taking out X-Force and pour more locks.
Yeah, but his he kind of plays a little bit like Claw, but on steroids. Because you can either take 2 indirect damage, and he wants to keep taking damage. And he has a base stat of 2 attack in his A form. But then you can choose his other option, which is to give him 1 additional face down boost card for that attack.
Yeah. So he has that swing of, it could be 5 attack or it could be 2 attack.
Yeah, and a lot of these cards in there are 2 and 3, or like 1 and a boost. They're pretty nasty.
Yeah, most of them have a boost or they're 2. There's a few 3, I think. So yeah, it's a good spread. So he has a high likelihood of doing 3+ damage, and is again his A side, his standard side.
Yeah. All right, Ryan. Rapid fire. You ready?
Nope.
What did you feel about having all of the villains in as a encounter set?
I thought it was fine. You got to see all of them, even though some of them weren't the villains. Their stats their stats were basically the exact same, and their abilities were basically the exact same. So it was just playing 2 a villain set and the minion set the exact same. There's some minor differences.
Yeah. A couple of them have retaliate, a couple have guard, a couple have control.
Yeah. And of course their health is less,
significantly less. Yeah.
I thought it was good, and it added some flavor to it. I think they pack more of a punch in the next scenario. But it was cool. So even though you're only playing 3 of those, you're still getting the experience of all of them.
Yeah. And I think I like what you said. They're not like too awful to deal with. Their health is right at a sweet spot where you probably can't get rid of them in 1 turn. Probably takes 2, or it takes using like your big attack to get rid of them.
Yeah, they're in that minion sweet spot where they're not too easy, but they're not too hard. There's still choices that have to be made, but they're not devastating. Like, there's some that's like, oh, when this one comes out, exhaust all your characters. Okay, great.
Right.
Thanks.
All right. Next rapid fire question.
All right.
What did you think about the military grade encounter set that came with these?
Military grade encounter set. Yes. I'm trying to remember some of them. I thought they were fine, kind of standard of building up. The one that really stunk, and I think we only actually had it come out like once, but the heavy armament.
Ugh, that was the one I was going to key in on.
Yeah, it's a weapon. It gives the whoever it's attached to +2 attack, and it attaches to the enemy with the highest attack. So it's just going to be really strong. But the worst part is it gains retaliate too. That stinks.
Yeah. And with that one though, I did like the variety that it wasn't like an always being attached to the villain card.
Yeah.
There was a good balance of it could go either way to a minion or the villain.
Yeah. It I like it when it can spread around, because then it creates different choices and everything. And the hero actions, or the way to get rid of these attachments, they aren't just spend 2 resources and you're done, but they all kind of have additional things to them. So like for the heavy armament, it says a hero response after you attack the attached enemy, spend 2 resources of the same type. So you have to attack, which means you're having to get that retaliate.
I almost found it almost easier to try and kill whoever it was attached to than try and deal with the retaliate, or spend the resources to get rid of.
Yeah, if you're gonna get damage, might as well just kill it and move on.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was good. The inhibitor color was also interesting because it attached to you and it made you weaker. So I thought that was pretty good.
I thought that one was decently balanced because you could, thematically they were making somebody pay for it. It wasn't just like you or your identity or another identity. They let you use other friendly characters to kind of thematically come over and help you rip it off your neck.
Yeah. I think it's a good little encounter set that can probably be overlooked really easy. That you could put into most villains, and it'd be just a good little extra change to other villains to make them stronger or whatnot.
Yeah, kind of spice up the board game.
Yeah. So I've got a rapid fire for you.
Oh, okay. And then I have one more for you.
Okay. What did you think about the Morlocks / Hyde?
You like that? Well, so
I got
I'll rapid fire right back, but I'll take your question. So, what did you think about the forced interrupt with the Morlocks? So think on that, and I'll answer your question. So for everyone, the forced interrupt says when an enemy attacks you, it attacks the Morlock you control instead. And one of the loss conditions of this particular one is if there are no more Morlocks in play, the players lose. I thought the Morlocks were good. They're 1 thwart, 1 attack, 5 health. There are things in the scenario that give them tough, which is kind of nice. So, and I don't think we saw anything that had piercing. So, it was kind of nice not to have to worry about something getting pierced and completely devastating a Morlock. I could be wrong on that, but I don't think I saw anything.
Yeah, I never felt worried. Because not only do they have tough, I think I'd have to look at 2A. Yes, they come in with the tough status card as long as the counters flipped 1B and not it schemed out.
If you didn't let the threat pop and let the knock counters go on, then they start with the tough, which is kind of a breather for a round, right?
Yeah, and then you have that, and then you have Hide, which is it surges. It's a treachery, it surges, but you give 1 Morlock ally a tough status card, so it's helping you. And you can exhaust. The 2B has an action. You can exhaust a Morlock ally, and you shuffle that encounter card from the discard into the encounter deck. Which I remember we did one time where the deck was really low, and we got it, and then we did that and just threw it back in. So that was really nice.
Because the boost kind of does the same thing, right? Yeah, give 1 Morlock ally a tough status card, give the villain an additional boost card. Yeah.
So I felt like with that, and them coming in with tough, and then them having 5 health, I felt they were very strong. I kind of, I think they might have been too strong.
Yeah, because I mean, at face value, it makes me think of Senator Kelly,
Mm-hmm.
and Senator Kelly had a lot of restrictions on
Yeah.
what could and could not be done to him. I mean, really, they're a friendly character, so you can sit there and add, first aids and other things to kind of enhance
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, and they take only 1 consequential damage. It's almost like trying to lure you into using their
Right.
thwart or attack, but we didn't have to. I feel like there almost needs to be a like a B side to them for like expert mode where they only have like 3 health.
Something crazy.
Yeah, just to make it harder, because I do feel like I never felt threatened
I never felt like
when
we
they
were
came
going to
out.
lose the game due to the Morlocks.
Yeah. It's it. I, I like the scenario because I like how it kind of moves it along with that first one. But when it flips to this one, it changes the game, of course. But I didn't feel like that pressure anymore.
Okay. There's other cards in here. We didn't really talk about a lot of the attachments. We did roughly talk about the attachments get significantly better for the villains as the game goes on, and there's more villains that are routed. Speaking of routed, I think that was probably one of the biggest things, like as a player, to like be mindful of, is to remember that once you defeat a stage, that the villain activates.
Yeah, that's stunk.
So it does take some planning, because you don't want to like make that the last thing you do on your turn, because then you're gonna like take a attack or scheme and then start the villain phase and do the same thing right over again.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I think it's a good way to keep the Marauders because of their stats and stuff, kind of keep them prevalent throughout the scenario. And I think it can create some fun protection deck, because there's one of the biggest issues with protection decks is you get all your defense cards and you can't use them.
Yeah.
So now this is a way that if timing works out, that you can use a bunch of those defense cards on player turn.
Yep. All right,
So,
Ryan.
overall,
yeah, I was gonna say, what
overall
are you
thoughts?
gonna rate Morlock Siege Scenario 1?
I think it was a great first scenario. I really like the progression of it. I do wish the second half was as exciting as the first half, but I did like how it just shifted gears from like almost like a standard scenario to a different type of scenario. I think this one is teetering on potentially my third or second favorite scenario of this box.
Okay.
It kind of teeters back and forth because I feel like I still need to play some of the other ones more. It's not my first one, but it's pretty close on that second or third.
Yeah. I feel similar. I think it's one of the better. I don't know. This box is tough. I feel like they're all good. Maybe a small kind of weak point, which we'll get to. But I do like the progression of the main schemes. I like it. It kind of makes the game feel different at different times. I really like that. I don't feel like it was extremely difficult in standard, so I'm grateful that there is an expert mode. We can go back and kind of try it in expert whenever we want, make it a little harder, more challenging. I do think that it has a little bit of luck and bad luck baked into it, unfortunately. You can luck out and just have some really easy combination of villains, or you could just come away with like having the worst three. Whether that's just worst due to damage, worst due to your hero's play style. But you have a potential to like be in for a really long bad game, or a really quick easy game, and then anything anywhere in between. Which I would say is a positive and a negative. It's gonna play different every time, but you might get a really, really bad hand draw on that one.
Yeah, I mean it doesn't matter if it's standard or expert, depending on how those cards fold out, it can be easier or harder. Which, I mean, you can almost say for any scenario, but this one kind of has that variety that creates those type of scenarios.
Sure. But I'm with you. I think overall it's a great, especially first scenario.
Yeah. Even though there's a lot going on, it didn't feel super complicated.
No, I would definitely say it's one that I would feel pretty confident in, introducing a newer player to. I think maybe the biggest thing is just the forced interrupt with attacking and it being directed towards Morlocks is something you gotta, emphasize.
Yeah. I think it's a simpler. I think it's a better scenario. No offense, than Sabretooth as a first round.
I will agree with you on that one.
Yeah, I think this kind of does a similar thing, like you said, the Morlock, Senator Kelly, but seems to go better, and they don't heal every second.
They don't completely negate everything you did on your hero turn?
Yes.
All right, Ryan, take us into the second scenario.
And I ran... sorry. On the run. So the next one is On the Run. You still use the Marauder villains, but this time instead of facing 3, you are only facing 1. And now, Scott, you're probably asking yourself, wait, how are you going to make this one Marauder villain, stronger, different? And let me tell you, it's called Hope's Captor. It's an attachment. And that gets slapped on to one of those Marauder dudes or ladies or whoever it is.
Harpoons.
They change up the game. They become more like a standard villain, or at least once you flip them the first time.
Yep. I think with that, if you're playing a campaign, it makes you take out the 3 you defeated, so then you're limited to the 4 remaining, which I like. So you get to see a variety as you go through the campaign for sure. What did you think about the main scheme kind of gimmick?
So
or mechanic?
I was when we were talking just a second ago about how that first scenario, it didn't feel complicated, but it still had some things you had to remember and whatnot. I feel like this one's almost not opposite, but it feels more complicated, but it's harder to grasp. Not that we didn't grasp it or we didn't play it right. It just seems like there was more little things that had to be done to make it feel different.
Yeah, it definitely changes your standard turn flow. And I assume you're talking about the forced interrupt on Hope's Captor.
Yeah, so that's part of it, and then so Hope's Captor has the forced interrupts, which is when the villain. Oh, I guess it's important to say the Marauder minion set's also included in this one too. When the villain would attack you, if a Marauder minion is engaged with you, the villain schemes instead. So it's trying to scheme out as quick as possible and bog you down with those minions. But then the 1B, so the main scheme, So each Marauder minion gains steady, and then expert mode, the villains gain steady too. And then if that stage schemes out, you lose, and it's an 8 per player, so it's a pretty good threshold to not be too quick. But it's, as the game progresses, I feel like it gets more complicated.
I do like the theme of this one. Like I felt like what it was trying to portray, the scenario portrays it well. Because the whole thing is like, the name of the first main scheme is Gotta Get Away, and then the second one is Escaping with Hope. And I like how, just like the first one, each one feels different. Like it changes the way the game plays. The first one just feels like you're trying to chase him, but whenever you defeat that first stage, everything kind of forces it into that second half of the scenario, and it really like ramps up. Like they're in that last little bit from escaping, and it definitely feels that way.
Yeah, so after you defeat the villain the first time, you flip Hope's captor, and so that villain gets a stat boost, scheme, attack, and health, and then it also automatically advances to 2A. So kind of like the first scenario, I like how it forces the game to change.
Yes.
So you're not just stuck in the same scenario, kill the villain and then kill him again. It's not adjusting. Well, I guess you can say adjusting, but evolving the scenario as you get stronger, they're getting stronger too.
So the one thing I wanted to point out and kind of help my earlier comment a little more is the first stage, it only goes up by 1 per player, and then the second main scheme, it goes up by 2. So it's advancing twice as fast, and the threshold only goes up by 1 per player in 9. So it feels a lot faster to need to get the villain defeated, and I do feel they did well by making it feel like the Marauder minions were really getting in your way, because some have patrol, some have guard, so you can't deal with the scheme, you can't deal with the villain until you're getting rid of them. Or if you look out in our case, and we each had one had patrol, one had guard, so the opposite just took care of what we needed to get rid of with the main scheme and damage.
Yeah, that kind of brings up the biggest thing that we noticed is when we first got this scenario going. I remember, I think we got a Grey Crow as the villain, and I was just like, oh my goodness, how are we going to deal with this? Because he's going to mess with our cards and our setup. And I was thinking, man, they're going to scheme. We're going to get beat up on these minions because they're just coming at us so fast. But when we actually played, I did not feel threatened at all. Like, it felt like this scenario, because of the force interrupts of like Hope's captor, it felt like we could manipulate it. Like you said, like I had, I think, guard and you had patrol, but I was the one thwarting and you were the one attacking, so it ended up being just fine.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. It wasn't too much of a hindrance when the attacker has the patrol and the thwarter has the guard.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can see this being more of a pain for a solo game of it. But in a 2-player game for us, it worked out where we were like, well, let's just keep these minions out because they're not really hurting us for whatever reason. I couldn't remember how we had it set up. And we could just thwart. And so we were not in danger that whole first half of the scenario.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want Grey Crow to attack me. He's going to get rid of all my upgrades.
The other thing that I noticed about this particular scenario is the main encounter deck from the scenario is fairly small. I mean, there's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
11?
8. Well, but you're taking out the two
Yes,
main schemes, Hope's Captor. So, I mean, there's not a ton of cards.
Yeah. But I will say I did like some of them. Trying to look through some of them real quick to see.
I want to say in some of our later plays, the Hidden in the Clutter was one that came out and attached quite often. And it just, when an enemy would take any amount of damage to attach to enemy, place it here instead. If there is at least 3 damage here, the attached enemy attacks the player who dealt the damage, and then you discard it. So that was the other like thematic things. I felt like everything was just trying to be put in your way to just slow you down.
Yeah. I liked some of them that focused on if this particular villain or minions in play do this extra. So like there's Pure Force, which is a side scheme. And it's got the acceleration and it's a 4, but it also, if Blockbuster's out, it also has the Crisis icon. If Chimera is out, it also has the Amplify icon. So I liked how some of them boosted depending on what was going on. And then some of the cards were trying to get those Marauders out to just be in your way. That like you said, thematically, it made sense. They were trying to get in your way so they could escape with hope.
What was the nastiest part of this scenario?
I was going to do a rapid fire, you snake.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, rapid fire.
What'd you think of the Nasty Boys?
They're so nasty. I thought they were good. They all kind of do something unique. They're not like awful with health. I think they're balanced in that they're not extremely difficult, but they have the potential to like wreck you with their teamwork.
Yeah.
I want to say we lucked out for the most part, and I think they only teamwork activated against us once or twice.
Mm-hmm.
We tried to get rid of them fairly quick because we knew the team up in just like past scenarios, playing past games with teamwork keyword, that it can be devastating.
Yeah. When we saw them out, we were like, let's get rid of them quick because I do not want to get teamworked.
No. But yeah, it was cool to see the characters. Growing up watching the '90s X-Men cartoon, you saw these people in like, I didn't read like a ton of comics. When you can't read, it's hard to read comics. But I knew the characters from those, so it was cool to like see.
What was that when you were like dude. 12 years old?
Oh yeah. So it was kind of cool to be like, oh, that's that guy's name from the cartoon. So
that I didn't know his name was Gorgeous George. I just thought it was the purple guy,
the weird stretchy purple guy from the Savage Land. Yeah. Hairbag.
That's classic naming. Yeah, I thought they are an encounter set you can just throw into a villain and they will just add that little extra oomph.
Yeah.
That for a villain.
This is one, like, if you have a hero that really likes minions, this is a scenario that's right up your alley. And then if you've got a hero that really doesn't like minions, because all you have is like big hitter attack cards, and you're going to waste them all on these, or your basic attack's not good enough to get rid, or you can't spread damage, I can see potential just being a rough game.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess let's just what's your verdict on it?
When we first played, I felt it was. I didn't feel like it was as good because I think we landed like the perfect scenario. But like as we played it a little more, this one's grown on me some. I know I just knocked it in the first segment, but I liked how the scenario gave different things. Like it gave the minions guard. It made it different to where normally you're like, oh, I need to plan for the villain attacking me. Oh wait, the villain's not gonna attack me. He's gonna scheme instead. And now I've got to figure out how to deal with some additional threat I wasn't counting on. I do kind of like that. I liked how it made you kind of balance which one is easier to deal with. Do I deal with keeping this minion in front of me so I can breathe and just let him scheme and just let the minion attack me and not be as damaged? Or do I go ahead and take care of this minion and just have to worry about how to defend or, waste an ally or something?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think I was very underwhelmed. I felt very overwhelmed when we were setting it up, and then quickly went underwhelmed because it's just, again, it could have been just the situation that we were able to game it just right and didn't feel very threatened that whole game. And then our last play of it, I don't think we gamed it the same way, but it at the same time it didn't feel very punishing. It didn't feel very difficult. So I don't hate it, but I guess I had a higher expectation because I think thematically it's one of the better ones because the mechanisms make sense for what the story is trying to say. But gameplay wise, I just think it didn't land for me as much as I was hoping.
That's fair. I would agree. It did not feel as difficult as I think maybe we, or at least I was anticipating it to maybe be a little more difficult.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is the thwart. The mechanisms are designed to try to scheme out, so that's the clock that you're facing. But if you have a character that can thwart good enough, it really isn't that big of a deal.
That was another thing I wanted to point out before we wrap, is you can luck out and get a villain that has 0 thwart. Because we played one game where Harpoon was our villain, and he has a 0 thwart. So if you're like, okay, just let him thwart. That was a benefit to us.
Yeah, that's why I feel like this scenario, because of whatever reason, that you can kind of game it a little bit. But it would be nice if there was a feeling of more urgency because they're actively running away. But the mechanisms that running away was just scheme, and you could just prevent that. So I don't know if it just needed a different mechanism, like counters,
like a race against the clock, kind of. Some type of thing, an end goal that you knew you only had until X occurring.
Yeah. I don't know if it needs you can't remove thwart. I mean, because it makes sense that if, or maybe I don't know. Maybe they all the minions have patrol, or all the Marauders have patrol, so you can't. They're running away, which is they're scheming, and you're not able to catch up, which is thwarting. And if the minions had patrol, then it puts that oh, now I do need to address this minion issue. Because if I don't, they're just going to scheme out and lose.
Right.
So I feel like instead of guard that is added, I think in 2B, it should have been patrol. or something like that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking through. I see what you're saying, and for the most part, I like what you're saying. But if you just get rid of the minions, then they never scheme in
That's
hero
true.
form, so then it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, I guess that's true. See,
I
that's
think
why you should play test.
I think the guard makes it to where they're trying to outlast the scheme with the health of the villain, or make the scheme pop before you can actually kill the villain.
Yeah. Either way, I think with it, just my experiences thus far, I think this was probably the scenario I least liked. So it'd probably be number 5 on the box for me.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's always got to be a number 5, and I think by default this one, like, I don't think it's bad, but unfortunately, it gets the number 5 spot for me as well.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's the worst scenario in the game. I think there's quite a few scenarios that I would put under this one, but yeah, it just didn't land as well as I was hoping in the box. So
Sweet. Yeah, I mean, it had high points. Let's give it a little bit. It had some high points. I think the flow of the scenario changing, those are some aspects I really liked. Mechanically, I like those things.
Yep. I agree. I like the mechanisms of the scenario matches the story. I think those are the best scenarios, and I think this one's the weakest of those.
All right. Well, hopefully soon we'll have some additional episodes for our remaining villains of the next evolution box. In the meantime, if you've got some question for us, we would be happy to hear from you. We would love to feature you on a Chatting with Chumps segment and answer some questions. And you can send those in and submit those at marvelchampionspod@gmail.com. And as always, if you want to go from a chump to a champ, listen to the Marvel Champions podcast. Thanks.
Don't get maraudered.
Ooh.